I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. This is going to be part of what will be released as a trilogy of episodes, wherein we talk about the various iterations of Planet of the Apes. We have previously recorded a singular episode about the 2001 Tim Burton.
Planet of the Apes.
Do you refer to that as a reboot, or how do you even describe that?
I guess it's a reboot.
Yeah.
It's like something stuck on the bottom of your boot.
Wow. That wasn't even an ape pun.
No, it wasn't an ape pun.
But this episode, we're going to focus on the newer Planet of the Apes movies, starting off with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which introduces us to a different timeline. Nate, let's couch it this way. Nate, why did you want to start with this one?
Well, I wanted
for
to
this set of recordings.
Well, because we've talked about the Planet of the Apes films over the course of the years.
We have argued about the Planet of the Apes films.
You had a theory,
and I maintain my theory,
that made me kind of upset, which is you viewed these Planet of the Apes, this new Planet of the Apes trilogy, as being canonical with the later.
You can
Apes
make the
films.
argument that it's canonical.
I don't think you can.
But only on the basis of ignoring, I can't remember if it's one or two of the original.
You have to ignore 4 of them.
No.
And you have to be very...
I completely disagree.
...selective about the first one.
This is why I wanted to start with the old ones before we came to these. I completely disagree with you, but we'll discuss that perhaps when we get into the old ones.
Okay.
The connections that I think make this work are relatively subtle. It's in this episode they talk about Icarus entering Mars orbit, and then later in the episode it's extremely subtle, but they talk about Icarus being lost.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And Icarus is the ship.
Yes and no. So they have this little moment late in the film when the chaos is starting regarding the apes, and they talk about this mission to Mars. And it's just kind of referenced briefly. And it feels like it is there to set up what I think would potentially be some additional Apes movies after this first trilogy. But Icarus in the original trilogy wasn't going to Mars, it was going to Alpha Centauri.
Well, but in this one it's going to Mars on its way to.
I think it's referred as a mission to Mars.
I don't know. I don't recall. They don't talk about it in depth enough. So I read an article, and to make sure we're giving proper credit, this is an article from a website called Pocketlint, and it's talking about the best order in which to watch the movies. And, the first Planet of the Apes movie is well over 50 years old. And so this talks about, you could watch it, you could go by theatrical release date, which is fun and it's good, which is the way that I happen to watch them. Is that how you watched it when we watched for this?
Well,
did you go out of order?
When I rewatched them, and we'll probably get into that more in the other one, I had not seen all of the Planet of the Apes films in their entirety.
Really?
Yeah. This original trilogy I had, not the original trilogy, but the
new trilogy. Yeah.
Which we should credit to Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver, who are the visionaries behind this. Rob watched at least part of a video I sent him earlier this week.
I watched the whole thing.
Which was an analysis, and they talked about how one of the things that sets this trilogy apart from the original Planet of the Apes films or the Tim Burton reboot is this was not like a studio mandated thing. Like, the studio didn't hire these people to write Planet of the Apes movies. These people were developing this as an independent idea and quickly realized this is Planet of the Apes, and then went to Fox. And Fox was smart enough to give them an incredible amount of latitude and not meddle in it like they did to the great detriment of the Tim Burton version.
Yeah.
And let this thing breathe organically and be its real distinct own self and just be something really apart from your average franchise film in terms of the quality and the intelligence that are manifested in this entire trilogy.
Anyways, referring back to this Pocketlint article, it says you can watch them in theatrical release date order, but they think it's more fun to watch the films chronologically. So you can watch the events unfold in a beginning to end timeline. You want to
that
interject?
Pocket Lint freaking gets stuck in the trap and gets thrown out at the end of the wash cycle. It's like I mean, I get what they're saying. They're saying chronologically, in terms of when they're set in time, because the original Planet of the Apes set 2,000 years in the future, at least the bulk of it is.
Yeah.
That you could read that as it kind of is, but it doesn't, because there's a time loop in the other films that contradict these films.
There is some contradiction there, but that contradiction doesn't come in until the lesser of those. So I don't really have a problem with setting that discrepancy aside. I will forever maintain that these three films work as a functional prequel to the original. And Nate will forever disagree with me.
You will forever be wrong.
I will forever be right. Yeah, that also, I'm not going to read the article, but yeah, it talks about it, and it says watch for the Easter eggs of it entering Martian orbit, and then it being lost. Quick.
Well, they're homaging, but it's an homage. I really don't think that. I mean, the continuity simply doesn't work.
I disagree. I think it works.
We'll get more into why I don't think it works when we talk about the originals.
Yeah. For me, it works because all of the things that are introduced as premises in the first one that are expanded on in the second movie, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Is that the second one?
You're talking about the original trilogy?
Yes.
Yeah, Beneath the Planet of the Apes is the second in the original quintilogy.
So things that are set up in the original Planet of the Apes, expanded on in Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and even to some extent Escape, are all set up fairly well by this trilogy, if you ask me. I guess for the rest of this conversation, we're going to have to just focus on these films and not the debate of whether they function as a prequel. Rise of the Planet of the Apes, we start out with the introduction to the character Bright Eyes, who then we later on learn has had a baby chimp, and there's a misunderstanding, and Bright Eyes is put down, but James Franco plays Will.
Yeah, so these apes are in captivity in the San Francisco Bay Area for a
medical
research company.
Yeah.
And James Franco is a scientist working at that company, and his goal is to create a cure for Alzheimer's, because his father, played by the wonderful John Lithgow, is suffering from Alzheimer's, and he wants to save his father.
Yeah.
So he has a noble motivation.
Yeah.
However, things don't quite work out.
Yep, but we learn that Bright Eyes has genetically passed on the treatments that she's been given in this Alzheimer trial to Caesar. So Will takes Caesar home, and then there's the montage of training Caesar, and then eventually they take Caesar to the Muir Woods. Interesting thing, regardless of how you feel about this being prequels and things like that, ALZ 112, that treatment that sparks all of this, is a virus.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to note.
So what the goal was this virus...
They were setting up the simian flu.
...was a way to...
Introduce,
the plan. Yeah. Well, the plan of James Franco's character was this virus would basically be used to cure the Alzheimer's, to go in there and repair as a vehicle for...
Well, it was the way to deliver the thing that creates the genetic modification that will reverse the Alzheimer's.
And because of the way medical tests work, you don't start out testing them on a human, and apes are close enough to humans. And one of the side effects of this drug is it increased the intelligence of the apes, because it was working on building their brains.
Yeah. Not just
it's
repairing
intended
it.
to be rebuilding the brains of Alzheimer's patients.
Yeah.
So they have the one particular test ape that goes ape and causes chaos in a board meeting, and so they put it down, but it was really defending its
That's
offspring.
Bright Eyes, yeah.
That's Bright Eyes.
Yeah.
And the project is scrapped, and all the apes associated with it are supposed to be put down. But James Franco just can't bring himself to kill this baby ape, takes it home, and trains it. And I forget, does he give it additional treatments?
No. What the Caesar, it was passed genetically from Bright Eyes to Caesar. He doesn't give Caesar any additional treatments.
But he does eventually treat his dad.
Yes. As his dad continues to deteriorate from the Alzheimer's, he treats him. His dad makes wonderful improvements, returns very quickly to, what you would call normal. But then eventually his dad builds up antibodies to the virus and starts to regress. That's when we also start to run into issues with Caesar. That's when he has that first confrontation with the neighbor, when he's going to put the bike chain back on the bike. And that's when Caesar is court-ordered to go to the primate facility, which is where we meet Tom Felton's character, Dodge Landon. Blanking on the other guy's name. The older guy at the primate facility.
Brian Cox.
Yeah. Then that's when Will begins work on ALZ 113.
I think there's some overlap in when some of these things go on, but he is eventually able to convince his kind of money-grubbing boss that they've had some success, but they need to do some additional work because after a period of roughly 5 years, the effects on John Lithgow start to stop working.
Yeah, he's built up antibodies to the virus.
Yeah, and so he wants to make a stronger version. And the flow of time in these films are interesting. So it never tells you what year it starts out with.
Yeah.
But so this film was released in 2011. So I'm going to use 2011 as baseline. So let's say the opening scenes of this film take place in 2011. And then you jump forward 5 years, which would be 2016. And like in the real world, everything starts to go to crap in 2016. Ape pun.
Yeah.
And so you had this period in which Caesar has grown up with John Lithgow and with James Franco, and then James Franco has a romantic relationship with the vet, who I think works principally in the zoo, and so that's why she knows how to work on various great apes. And she is played by the rather beautiful Frida Pinto, coming off of the success of Slumdog Millionaire. She never really made that full transition.
Yeah.
Like, she had this, and it's really the only other American film I can think of that she was in. But they have this kind of little family thing going, and then when Lithgow starts to degenerate, he accidentally tries to carjack the annoying next-door neighbor's car, threatening him. Caesar leaps out and then gets sent
to protect him,
to the detention facility.
But this coincides with the Alzheimer's returning, so Will begins work on another variant of the treatment, which is referred to as ALZ 113. As a plot point, it's interesting to note ALZ 113, ALZ 112, the original treatment, was administered as an injection. ALZ 113 is administered as an inhalant. It's airborne. So Koba is the first ape that they administer ALZ 113 to.
It's a traumatized ape who's been through
numerous testing.
Very abused creature.
Yeah. And during this process of administering it to Koba, one of the lab workers, his mask is knocked off and he's exposed to the virus. That is Tyler Labine playing a character named Robert Franklin.
He's our patient zero.
Yes. While this is happening, Caesar's introduced to the other primates, fights with the lead primate at the primate facility, and Tom Felton's character tranquilizes him. And then we observe Koba's development, the lab worker starting to get sick, Caesar becoming the dominant ape within the primate facility through various means of smarts and manipulation, and things of that nature.
Because he has this break, and the video that we watched talks about that. He's an ape that always wanted to be human, and now
or just viewed himself as human.
Yeah, and he's forced into dealing with others of his kind, and being cut off from those that he knows, and he goes through this transformation where at first he's uncomfortable with his fellow apes. And then he starts to identify with them more than with the humans, as he did before. And he comes up with this scheme to give his kind an advantage that he feels they deserve but don't have.
Well, at first I think he's just trying to go for a comfortable living. I don't think it's in his mind originally to go for the advantage. I think that comes as part of that process, and as he's abused by Tom Felton's character, Dodge Landon. That's when he starts to think of teaching them to be better and bigger and more.
But Felton needs to realize that when he picks on someone, he just turns them into the hero of the franchise.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
He's done this before.
Yep. So, anyways, Caesar, at one point, Will gets the court to order Caesar to be released. And this is where the break finally happens. He goes back and Caesar chooses to stay. Because now he's made the connection with all of his apes, the other apes, and he's got them working with him. Caesar eventually breaks out of the facility, goes to Will's home, because Will has, well, he doesn't know this when he goes there, but Will has brought some of the ALZ-113 home and has started treating his father with the ALZ-113. Caesar steals it, takes it back to the sanctuary, punctures it, rolls it through, treats all the apes during the night, and all the apes wake up the next morning smarter. And then he begins to start to teach them. And he's teaching them to sign, he's teaching them all sorts of things. That's when we have Icarus entering Mars orbit. Is at that point in the film. Caesar finally speaks, tells Tom Felton's character no, which is always it's the reverse from the original franchise.
Yeah, and they also talk about how, Caesar, there's the gesture of...
The supplicating gesture.
Supplicating gesture. And this is the first time that he's basically rejecting the idea of the supplicating gesture and taking control of a situation like this. And
yeah. This is also when we have the confrontation with Dodge Landon and Caesar. And Caesar chooses not to originally forcibly kill Dodge Landon, but then when Dodge Landon comes at him again with the cattle prod, that's when he sprays him with the hose and presumably kills him, from the electrical shock. Mm-hmm. And that's when the apes escape the facility and it starts the Planet of the Apes. But of course, they've all been treated with this ALZ-113. And so as soon as they escape that facility, they are beginning the spread of the simian flu.
Yeah. Which is spread also, I think, principally spread through...
Largely through the neighbor.
Through the neighbor, yeah, and through the...
because at one point,
technician,
Robert Franklin goes to Will's house because he started to develop symptoms, but he doesn't want to go back to the lab initially. So he goes to Will's house, and there's a confrontation as he's trying to get into Will's house. The neighbor comes over and he sneezes a bloody sneeze on the neighbor. It infects the neighbor,
jerk neighbor
who is a pilot, who then goes to the airport, and you see him getting a nosebleed as he gets ready to board a flight. Yeah, that's how the simian flu spreads. That's also when Will discovers that Caesar has stolen the ALZ-113 and has administered it. This is also, right then, it's the newspaper headline at this moment in the film that tells us that Icarus has been lost in space. Did you happen to catch that?
I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah. But yeah, that's done through a newspaper headline. And then the apes storm the lab, free the other primates at the lab, including Koba, who's already been treated. And then that leads to the battle on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, very visual. So the visual set piece of the entire film. And this is as they make their exodus to the woods on the other side, where Caesar has visited before and knows that this is a logical place for his kind to flee. Quite the sequence on the Golden Gate Bridge. And
you have on that bridge, you have the first, it's an ape that is killed first by humans. And then that's when the apes start really fighting back. And eventually, that's when they push the bus, as a piece of armor, things of that nature. And then eventually one of the apes, or one of the gorillas, sacrifices himself to take out the helicopter, things of that nature. It's interesting that Koba then pushes the helicopter with Jacobs inside of it off the bridge.
Jacobs being the boss.
The boss at the lab. Koba also then goes to attack Will in the woods, but Caesar's the one that stops him. So Koba, this becomes a plot point later on. Koba already long has the desire to kill humans. Yeah. I guess extract revenge on humans. Mm-hmm. So, but then the movie ends with the pilot neighbor getting sick as he boards a plane and spreads the virus. And the film closes with the simian flu spreading across the U.S. and across the globe.
Quite effectively portrayed with, you see lines of like airline routes.
Flight
as
paths.
It goes different parts of the world, and then it spreads in very rapid succession and setting up for the next film. One thing we've neglected to talk about that is so central to all of these films is the lead performance by Andy Serkis, the Laurence Olivier of motion capture acting, who takes this, and the effects are great.
Yeah.
I think these effects will stand the test of time. They look really good. And make us sympathize so much with Caesar, and over the course of the franchise, of course aided by the other motion capture performances, which are generally of lesser known performers, make our loyalty shift from our own kind to the Apes over the course of this franchise.
Yeah.
Which is
the closest you can say to trying to maintain that loyalty, I think, comes in the second one, in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. That one is where you see, for lack of more acute terms, the humanity pitted against each other.
Yeah.
Does that lead us into the second one?
Yeah.
Leads us to the 2014 release, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I don't know about you, but personally I felt that this franchise built as it went. I felt that Dawn was better than Rise.
Well, I can see where you're coming from. I think when I first saw it, I probably would have agreed with you. On rewatch, I think I probably liked Rise a little more. But it does lend a question about the naming. What is the difference between a Rise and a Dawn? They're the same freaking thing. And it does make the order a little bit confusing. This is a super minor point. But yeah, I would get the titles of the first two films confused.
Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was released in 2014. Andy Serkis continues to be Caesar. He's Caesar throughout the films. Other leads in this one, Jason Clarke, Gary Oldman, Kerry Russell, Toby Kebbell,
Cody Smith McPhee, and Judy Greer as Cornelia. Judy Greer is always a mom anymore, even as an ape. So this film picks up 10 winters after the simian flu. And
10 full years.
10 full years. And I feel like civilization was wiped out in probably around a year, more or less wiped out. And there were some people that had a natural immunity.
Yes.
But far less than 1% of the population. And so the apes have been hanging out in the woods outside San Francisco, basically avoiding the cities. But they're aware the humans have
Well, and it's
off.
implied that there are other remaining pockets of civilization around the world. Presumably in city centers, just because that's the easiest place to congregate, or individuals, around the world. But yeah, as you mentioned, it seems like a fairly small percentage of the population that was immune.
And it had been years since at the start of this film, it's been years since they've seen a human.
And it's been years, yeah, exactly. Since the apes have seen a human, and since the humans have seen the apes. But Jason Clarke leads an expedition out from the city of San Francisco. They're trying to make their way up into the woods to a dam, trying to get some of the hydroelectric back online to generate power to get back, to get some functions back, regain some civilization, and start to reestablish. And as they make their way to the dam, they come across the ape colony. There is a moment wherein Kirk Acevedo, playing a character named Carver, shoots Blue Eyes, is shot, and that's Rocket's son. Yeah. So that's when Carver shoots Blue Eyes, and the whole ape colony comes and swoops down on top of this group of the humans. They're clearly outnumbered. Jason Clarke's Malcolm makes the decision to surrender rather than fight. They're told to go home. They go back. Gary Oldman is like a quasi-mayor of this colony. It's never implied directly how he becomes the leader. It's almost like he's a mayor, but at the same time it's like he was a military leader.
He just had this natural leadership ability, and they don't go over all the logistics of how society kind of reorganized itself in this particular San Francisco colony. One thing that is interesting about this is the trauma that all of these humans have been through, which I think would have influenced their
They've all lost
behavior.
loved ones.
They've all lost everybody. The principal couple is Jason Clarke and Kerry Russell, and they got together after the disaster. They both lost spouses.
And Cody Smith McPhee, Alexander, is Malcolm's son from his original marriage.
So there's some genetic basis to survivability, apparently, immunity.
But is being not raised by Kerry Russell, but Kerry Russell has effectively become like an adoptive mom. Mm-hmm. But that relationship clearly is
somewhat strained.
Yes, or building, however you want to look at that. Kerry Russell's great in this film. I'm always a fan of Kerry Russell.
I'm a fan of her, and I'm a fan of Jason Clarke.
Jason Clarke, I kind of have mixed feelings about him because he frequently plays guys that you're not supposed to like.
True.
And so I want to say I dislike numerous of his characters, which just means that he's a good actor. After
what he did to Anne Hathaway in Serenity.
Oh, yeah. Also, I have mixed feelings about his character in Zero Dark 30. Mm. Yeah.
And he took over the White House.
Yeah.
In
Olympus Has Fallen. Not Olympus.
The White House Down.
Yeah. Anyway, so eventually Malcolm's character goes back
after being specifically told not to come back by Caesar.
Yeah.
Who spared them partially for strategic reasons and partially because he still has a certain sentimental attachment to the humans, which is remarked on in his conversation
with Koba.
But with not with Koba, with
Rocket. Maurice.
Maurice, the orangutan.
Yeah.
And they're communicating
through
through signs.
Yeah.
Because really it's just Caesar early on that can
speak.
Talk.
Yeah. So Maurice is voiced by and played by Karen Conoval. Did you catch what other role she plays in the first film?
No.
She's the court clerk who tells Will that he can't get.
Oh.
Yeah. So she has two roles in the first one. In the subsequent film, she's just Maurice. Maurice is always a favorite of mine.
Yeah.
I love Maurice. So they have a conversation about this. Malcolm comes back, and he makes his way into the actual heart of the ape colony. He explains to Caesar why they're there, why this is important, that they're going to keep coming back until they can get to the dam. So Caesar agrees, but gives him a timeline. So Malcolm, and part of the deal is that Carver can't come back. Or no, Carver is allowed back, but all the humans have to surrender their weapons. Carver hides a weapon, which is eventually discovered, and so they're kicked out. But this is as the apes, Caesar has the apes helping the humans get the dam online. Because Caesar has this, I think it's fair to say, naive belief that if the humans get the dam restored, they're just not going to bother their colony. That they can live in their separate areas, and maintain their separate ways. You could call it hope, you could call it naivety. I think either one would be appropriate. This is also around the same time that Caesar's wife gets sick after giving birth to their second son. Kerry goes back and treats Caesar's wife. And as a result of that, Caesar grants the humans one more day to finish, restoring the dam. They do that. Koba also, while there, is hatching a plot to disrupt this peace.
Yeah.
And so Koba goes back to the city, steals some guns, comes back, shoots Caesar,
humans,
and blames it on the humans. And before he shoots Caesar, he's already set a fire at their colony. So the colony goes up in flames, and this is the pretext to go and fight the human colony. So the apes mount up, and Caesar's son, this is the first time that he sees, because he's been kind of back and forth on, it's kind of
he's a young ape.
That childhood rebellion against the father, but he sees Koba. Koba fosters certain beliefs in him. So he's not sure whether Koba's, better or his dad's better, but very quickly realizes what war means and that what his dad was trying to avoid. And as soon as they overrun the human village, Koba begins holding some of the apes prisoner. It's very quickly, lines are delineated. Maurice and most of the orangutans, as well as most of the gorillas, are locked up. Differently than the humans are locked up, but locked up nonetheless. Caesar is discovered downriver by the humans, by Malcolm and Kerry. They load him up in a vehicle and, of course, end up back at Caesar's childhood home with Will. where somehow the camera has battery after 10 years, and they're able to turn on the camera, or is the camera charged by the power they brought online?
Yeah.
You know, that's, but then they never turn on lights in the house. Is that strategic, or is that, you know, who knows?
But anyway, Jason Clarke figures out more of the backstory. And, you know, these humans were very surprised to find the smart apes. They had some memory of the thing that happened on the San Francisco Bridge, because that would be a story that would...
But your society evolved really quickly thereafter.
Exactly. Because that was probably like one of the last... That and the Mars mission were like the two last big news stories before everybody started dying of the simian flu.
Yeah.
Which, of course, the mutation of the stronger 113 virus.
Yeah.
Good for apes, bad for humans.
So then...
Well, Caesar's firstborn.
Yeah. Anyway, so they start hatching a resistance plot. His son goes in, frees Maurice and the orangutans and the gorillas. And they come back and regroup. And eventually Caesar comes... Well, eventually there's a big confrontation at a tower down in San Francisco.
This is a big tower that was under construction at the time that the world fell apart.
Yeah. And there's multiple plot lines converging here. At the same time that Caesar goes to confront Koba to reclaim, you know, the ape colonies or the ape society, the humans are planting explosives to blow up the base of the tower and kill them off.
Gary Oldman is underground with a big bomb, an homage to Beneath the Planet of the Apes. And he has also established contact with surviving elements of the military in apparently Northern California, and has alerted them to the situation down in San Francisco, and they are sending fighter jets.
Yes. Which it's impressive that they would still have fuel for those fighter jets, but... Yeah, so then there's the confrontation at the tower. Caesar's big thing throughout this movie is that apes, you know, ape
shall not kill ape.
And so at one point when he has, you know, there's a moment where it looks like he's got a chance to save Koba. You know, well, Caesar saved Koba, but Koba defines his own death or precipitates his own death. Koba falls and is killed, and the tower's blown up, but the apes survive. Caesar survives. Only a few are killed.
Caesar and Jason Clarke leave on terms of mutual respect.
Yes. But Jason Clarke tells him that they've called for help and that more humans are on the way with more weapons and the military's coming. So the apes flee, and that's pretty much the wrap-up of this one. Any other thoughts on this one?
No, this just segues us into the final element of the trilogy, which is...
War for the Planet of the Apes.
From 2017. I don't know about you, but I saw both Dawn and War theatrically.
I saw all of them theatrically.
And I saw the original one on a bus full of Chinese tourists in 2013.
Yeah. This one, I thought it was interesting that this one had, of the three films, was the most subdued.
Yeah.
I think that's intentional. It's interesting. But this one opens up 15 years after the events of the first film, or 5 years after Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
So let's talk timeline, because I love timeline. So opening scene of the first one, 2011. Closing scene of the first one, 2016. 10 years later, number 2 takes place in 2026. So this film is set in 2031.
No, this is... Wait, say that all again.
Okay, so first one ends
2011
through 2016. Jump 5 years ahead, 2026.
And then this is 5 years later, 2031.
2031, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I followed that time. The war has been ongoing for 5 years. The apes are hunted, in particular by a Special Forces colonel and his crew, played by Woody Harrelson, and is literally credited as just the colonel. Again, Andy Serkis is Caesar. Other familiar ape characters remain the same. It's interesting that the Special Forces are using apes as, quote, donkeys to haul supplies and munitions for them.
There's being a reference to Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
So they have some traitor apes. So at the end of the last film, those who were in Koba's camp basically burned their bridges with the larger ape community. And so some of them
have, out of necessity, allied themselves with the humans as turncoats.
It's also somewhat implied that apes from around the world, smarter, more intelligent apes from the simian flu, are being used by humans and or military and other societies. This donkey concept doesn't seem to be limited to just this encampment.
No, because they talk about when they interact with when our main apes interact with some of the donkeys, they know them because they used to be in society together. And it's not until they encounter
Bad Ape, played by Stephen Zahn,
that is Caesar's first encounter with a smart ape who's not from their tribe.
Yeah.
But the implication is that this thing has spread.
There's some implication through the way the military operates, or at least I read into it, that they're not the only military unit using the apes in this way, but they may be limited in the ones calling them donkey and things of that nature, but yeah. So it opens up with some battle sequences at an outpost, the special forces crew trying to track down and kill off the apes.
Who seem to be slowly moving northernly. Further northern into California and maybe even into Oregon.
Yeah. We're told that in that opening battle, the apes lost 63. And after the battles, Caesar releases human survivors. He releases at least, he puts them all on horseback and gives the one human a message to take back to the colonel and tells them to leave the woods to the apes. And, they're all tied up on the back of the horses and sends the horses off. It's interesting that every time Caesar has the opportunity, he still continues to release the humans, sends them back, gives them the opportunity for peace at every chance that he can. Yeah, Caesar's second son is named Cornelius. Blue Eyes, which is Caesar's oldest son, returns with Rocket, and they both return to the encampment, and they tell of the long journey to get to a desert. So that's presumably going westward from wherever they're at in California. But as night falls, there's debate in the camp because the apes are scared because the humans keep getting closer and closer. And so there's debate in the camp of how quickly they should leave to go to this new place and try and rebuild their colony, their colonies and such. But is that, they're told that they're going to spend some time thinking about it. And that night, while they're sitting in the encampment, Caesar's lodgings are near a waterfall, and Caesar finds a rope in the waterfall. He goes to try and discover what's going on in this colony, and the Special Forces team is already there. The colonel comes into that part of the cave system and kills Blue Eyes, thinking that it's Caesar, and kills the rest of Caesar's family, except for Cornelius. Yeah, so Caesar pursues the colonel up the rope, but the colonel's able to cut the rope and escape. It's interesting to me in that moment that the colonel, whose sole objective is to kill Caesar, now sees that he didn't kill Caesar and continues to flee. Why doesn't he continue the fight?
Oh.
So Caesar comes back, thinks his whole family's dead, but Cornelius has been hiding the whole time. So he at least has one member of his family left.
Because Caesar's wife had passed away early in this film.
No, she's shot. Along with Blue Eyes by the colonel. Okay. Blue Eyes, Caesar's oldest son, is dating an ape named Lake, or has formed a partnership with Lake. So Caesar leaves Cornelius with Lake, tells the rest of the apes that, as they are beginning their journey towards the desert, that he's not coming with them. He realizes he's got to go and find the colonel. If they're going to have any chance of peace, he's got to go and confront the colonel. Of course, Rocket and Maurice go to accompany Caesar along with a gorilla.
He doesn't want them to come, but they more or less insist that they will go with him.
Especially Maurice. They come across a house. That confrontation with the father is an interesting confrontation. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, are you talking about with the human father?
Yes.
So they come across, as they're journeying, their plan is to both find the colonel and act potentially as decoys, because they're going in a different direction from the main colony. And they come across this man living in an abandoned house. They eventually have to kill him.
Yep.
And they find that he is protecting a daughter.
Yeah.
But something is wrong about this little girl, who they eventually name Nova, off of a metal
It's the insignia of an
insignia
old
of
car.
an old Chevy Nova.
Yeah,
And of course, Nova is a character name in the original franchise.
indeed.
And this little girl cannot talk. And Maurice finds this odd, and eventually we learn that this is starting to be a problem.
Yeah.
Humans are losing the ability to speak
Well, it's a variant in the
as the
simian
simian
flu.
flu continues to mutate.
It's a mutation, yeah. But regardless, Maurice, says he refuses to leave the girl. So Maurice adopts the girl. Is bringing her along with them.
She's very well disposed towards them too.
Yeah, yeah. She seems
She
to
just
not
takes
know any
to
better.
them. Yeah.
Yeah,
As they journey further north, they happen on what appears to be an old ski lodge,
yeah.
and they find living in the lodge Betty.
They climb the tower, and Bad Ape comes to steal things off of their horses, and they chase him back to this lodge, and yeah, Bad Ape is a charming character in
He
this
is, yeah. Steve Zahn is great here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. He's known as Bad Ape, and that's how it's credited in the roles. But he just adopted the name Bad Ape because as he was learning to speak, people just kept calling him Bad Ape, and yeah. It's kind of a sad moment.
It is just kind of a sad story. He was in a zoo.
Yeah.
And the virus eventually got to him and mutated him. But he can talk, and the other apes really can't.
Well, he seems to have been kept in service to humans for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he learned to talk, was observing the humans. Mm-hmm. Because he can't sign like the other apes can sign.
That's true.
So he learned to talk from being around the humans. And then the humans eventually died off or left him. And so he can
He's been
speak.
foraging. Yeah.
And he's got quite the collection at the lodge. And connects with Nova very quickly.
I think he has a line where he talks about how the children used to come to see him at the zoo.
Yeah.
And so that her presence sparked something in him.
Yeah. But the ape that had gone with Caesar in that group at the beginning is an ape. Well, he fled the encampment. There was an ape called Winter, who's one of the ones that primarily gets scared. So as these guys are trying to pursue the soldiers, they eventually come across a soldier encampment. They sneak into the encampment and find Winter has gone to the humans and is working for the humans. And there's a moment where in their confrontation with Winter, just to keep Winter from talking and revealing that they're there, they inadvertently kill Winter. Caesar, was covering his mouth and nose and just holds it for too long, and Winter presumably passes.
The dead of winter.
So they, again, are still continuing to follow them. They learn of the California border quarantine facility, which is where the military complex is now held up. They've held up at this quarantine facility. Also are trying to use that. They're trying to, originally part of the reason they went there was to get the supplies that were held there. So the apes begin their journey to go to this facility, and that's when they see the soldiers erecting the barriers with the apes on them. You remember that?
Yeah.
They narrowly avoid detection, and that's when Luca, the gorilla that's in their company, gets killed. So that leaves us just with Maurice,
Caesar,
Rocket,
Bad Ape,
Caesar, and Bad Ape, and the girl, and Nova. Caesar is quickly discovered at the border, is knocked unconscious by another ape, and is taken captive and is enslaved with the other apes of the colony. Him and the colonel have some confrontations. He stands up to the colonel. The colonel threatens to kill Caesar unless the apes go back to work, and they go back to work strictly to save Caesar.
Yeah, and we should mention that they are surprised to find that the larger company of apes has been intercepted by the colonel's men and then dragooned into forced labor to build basically a big wall to protect that installation in which the colonel's men are set up. Now, it is assumed...
And we will find out why later on.
They make some assumptions about why, but...
Yeah. So Bad Ape leads Maurice and Rocket to this facility. The colonel is who tells us of this mutation of the virus and tells us more about it, and leaving his family behind, things of that nature.
About how he lost his son, because again, the genetic... If your dad survives, you'll probably survive. And so his son survived, but his son got infected after...
By the mutation.
It was after some kind of conflict with apes. Like he was in
Yeah.
vicinity of apes shortly before, he started to get this aphasia, started to go all babble and scramble his words, and also decreased intelligence, becoming, in effect, an ape.
Yeah.
The tables have turned.
This is also when we find out. So the colonel is very. I mean, we observe at one point they kill soldiers in their company who are starting to develop this mutation. They can't talk, so they just shoot them and leave them. And apparently this is viewed poorly by the outside world. So we learn that the reason that he's building up this facility is that the army is coming for the colonel because they don't like the way he's handling this mutation of the virus. And so he needs the apes to unearth the weapons depot housed at this quarantine facility, not just build the wall. And yeah, so that's what they're using the ape labor for. It's implied that the colonel would then just kill all the apes afterwards. But yeah, so the army's coming for the colonel. And that's why the apes are enslaved. So Caesar's strung up in the middle of the encampment. The apes keep working around him. And Nova makes her way into the military base.
This is where it gets a little bit like The Great Escape.
Yeah.
Or a World War II movie, because there's tunneling into the prison camp.
Yeah. Yep. By Bad Ape and Maurice. Rocket also sacrifices himself to save the girl. And that's when, at one point, when the little girl, when Nova is trying to comfort Caesar, she drops her doll, or gives it to Caesar to comfort him. And the next day, the doll is discovered. And so the colonel's kind of wondering what's going on, but the colonel takes the doll back to his room, which is a plot point at the end of the film.
It's a Velveteen Rabbit.
Yep. So Caesar's sent to the quarry alone. Caesar and the other apes are sending details to Maurice. Maurice and Bad Ape begin the excavation and evacuating the apes. Nova is used as a lookout to signal things that are happening, and that's also when the water begins to flood into these tunnels, expediting the need to follow through with these evacuations before they lose their tunnels.
And agitating Bad Ape to no end.
Yes. Bad Ape's a funny character in this movie. Yeah, and as this battle and this confrontation occurs as the apes are fleeing,
the forces from the north arrive. There's chaos.
Well, it's even before that. There's the confrontation as the apes are trying to flee, and the people are shooting at the soldiers are shooting at the apes, and so Caesar has gone to go kill the colonel, and discovers the colonel. So this is before the other army shows up.
Okay, yeah.
And there's a donkey sitting up on top of this wall where they've got all these munitions, and they're just mowing down the apes. And the donkeys are watching it in order to get more munitions. And they see Caesar, who has a plan to blow up a fuel tanker to try and just allow the other apes to escape. And the donkey revolts and picks up a grenade launcher, blows up the fuel tanker, blows up the wall. This is also, I guess you were right, this is the same time as the other armies showing up. And so the apes are kind of caught in this weird kind of crossfire moment.
Yeah.
But this blowing up the fuel tanker triggers an avalanche. And the avalanche is coming down and actually overtakes both armies, which is kind of interesting in terms of a plot point, why you would take out both armies, but it works. It's a convenient way out of the situation.
The apes being apes and being surrounded by trees are
able
to
to
get
climb
up
the
high
trees.
enough.
Yeah. And so then as soon as that happens, the apes begin their travel to their new home, and of course as soon as they get there, Caesar is just too weak to continue. Caesar dies.
It's like Moses.
Maurice promises Caesar that his son will know him and what he did for the apes, but his son Cornelius is being raised by Luca, but Maurice promises to pass it on, and that's the end of this trilogy.
Oh. And it's
a poignant
beautiful.
end.
It's a poignant end,
yeah.
And it is the story of Caesar.
But we forgot to touch on the colonel. When Caesar goes to find the colonel, he finds the colonel has contracted the variant of the virus and has locked himself in his chambers.
And his men are confused about why he has not arrived to help them now that the army from the north has arrived.
Yeah.
And that's because he wants to die. He doesn't want to spread the disease. He tries to get Caesar to kill him.
He even just wants Caesar to give him his gun so that he can kill himself. And Caesar just moves the gun away from him.
Yeah.
Just forces him to live with die living with this disease, or whatever it is, that everyone else that he's been killing so many people for. But yeah, it's just a poignant end to this trilogy of films. I actually don't think War is the strongest in the three. For me, Dawn is the strongest.
As I think about it, I think you might be right. And I generally am a sucker for the middle parts of trilogies.
Uh-huh.
I think maybe in reviewing, I just thought that the first one was stronger than I'd remembered it being, and so that made me think that I liked it more. But you're right. The second one is the one that shows that this can work, that this isn't a fluke, and that they've got some interesting things to say. The third one is a very fitting ending. Again, it gets poignant at the end. I tend to find the long sequences of the apes talking in sign language kind of boring after a while. And
you didn't enjoy the subtitles?
No, that's fine. It's just they're the slower sequences, and there's an awful lot of it.
Yeah.
And it just gets to be a little bit of a drag, which is maybe why the first one flows more, because there's more dialogue, there's more human interaction. But this is a really smart reimagining. Again, it's a franchise film it's a franchise that's just smart, that handles it very intelligently. So this is both a popcorn movie and kind of a thinking movie.
Yeah.
All three of them.
Well, in this video that you talked about that we watched, it talks about how this version of the Planet of the Apes is couched kind of from a human perspective, and it kind of humanizes the apes as opposed to in a way that the original films
because
don't.
we follow a natural progression. We're not dropped into the middle of this
We're dropped into a world we know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the world changes from the world we know to the world we don't know.
And it also makes a lot more sense than the original trilogy. It provides, or the original 5, because it provides a much more logical explanation of developments.
Yeah. I would love to see more films along this lines, but I'm not sure where you take it from here. But all three of these were so strong to me that I would welcome seeing something else on this line. But I would hope they wouldn't screw it up.
I've always assumed, since they very deliberately made reference to the spaceship in the first one, that they were setting up something akin to the original Planet of the Apes, where these people are going to survive somehow. They're going to go through a time portal, or they're going to do suspended animation or something, and they're going to come back to Earth centuries later and find a civilization run by apes. And that is how they'll kind of create the second wind of this franchise. This is an assumption, and part of me wonders if that wasn't introduced as like a favor to the studio.
Uh-huh.
Like if things go in a certain direction, these are successful, and you want to continue, we've given you your little opening
at some point down the line.
Maybe the two that wrote these original 3 films, and it was the same two. I mean, there's the through line in the writing makes the difference here, because the earlier Planet of the Apes films, they just kind of were winging it from.
Well, I was just looking. This one is directed by Matt Reeves, and Matt Reeves also gets credit as a writer.
Okay.
I didn't look to see who wrote or directed the middle one. Do you recall?
I know it's the 2 principal writers are involved in writing all of them, but I forget who the director was in the second.
Yeah, Matt Reeves directs this one as well. Mark Baumbach and Rick Jaffa. Interesting, though, on the writer credits on the third one, Matt Reeves is credited ahead of Rick Jaffa. So, yeah, I'm not familiar with any specific reasons why they're. Yeah, how would you rate these films?
They're all very solid. This is a strong trilogy that I could recommend to most anybody.
Yeah.
These films are consistently 8s and 9s
yeah.
on a 10-star scale, and 3.5s.
Yeah, I think we're pretty close in line on that. I would give the middle one 9 stars. The War for the Planet of the Apes, I'd give 8 stars.
Yeah.
Maybe 8.5 if I could, split hairs on half stars. The weakest I think of this one, of this trilogy, I think is the first one. But the first one's still really solid.
Yeah.
That's not to say, I love this trilogy. I think it's great. I watch this one probably once every 2 years or so. Mm-hmm. But it's something you can easily throw on and watch. So I really enjoyed rewatching these, as we prepared for this conversation. But yeah, and they work as a prequel.
And there will be more on that
when we return.
Yep.
So I'm Rob.
I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. And the prequels work.
Apes do not kill ape franchises.
Nice.
I like how Edward G. Robinson's last scene in film is a death scene.
Yeah. Okay, you ready?
As is John Wayne's.
Is it really?
Yeah. He's shot to death in the shootist.
Uh-huh.
You know, the main drawback about recording an episode on the Planet of the Apes for me, and I don't really have any control over this, but it's going to set my brain off on a search for as many ape puns as it can possibly find. So let's stop monkeying around and record this episode.
Sweet. I made a note that I need to glance at because I don't remember why I made the note. That's pretty entertaining. I keep forgetting that Caesar's son's name.
Cornelius?
That's the second one. Isn't it? You want me to scroll up?
And just make sure it's still recording.
Yep.
Okay.
I blanked on what I was going to say. A nice reference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're pretty hard set on no prequel, huh?
Yeah. We'll get into it.
Yeah.